You're ready, your mic's open, go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon and welcome again to the CERIAS Security Seminar. It is a distinct pleasure for me to introduce our next guest and to be in town to be able to introduce our speaker today. Someone I've known for well over a decade, been very influential in the field in a number of ways. Richard Power. And I met Richard first when he was the editor-in-chief for publications for the Computer Security Institute. And while there, he was responsible for a number of things, their newsletter as one example, but in particular getting started the annual Computer Crime Survey, the Clear and Future Danger publication that CSI put out, very valuable publication. After that, he went on to become the director for Global Security Intelligence for Deloitte, and is currently an independent consultant who writes and speaks and advises on issues of security in the big picture, more than simply the technology. I think you'll find his views very interesting, so please join me in welcoming Richard Power.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here. Professor Spafford, or Spaff as we call him in the underground, has been one of my heroes for as long as I've known him, and as he mentioned, it's well over a decade, and the hero of many others. This talk is the last of 7 talks that I've given this year, and all of them turned out to be in a 60-day period. And so in the past 60 days, I've been at a NATO Advanced Research Conference in Bulgaria, and at the Santa Fe Institute, and at George Washington University, and Georgetown Law Center, and High-Tech Crime Investigators Association, and forgive me if I left anybody out, but it's just wonderfully poignant for me to end it here with Spaff with this tremendous program. So thank you all for coming. This is, as billed, a kind of a 10-year retrospective from 1996 to 2006, and why this is so will kind of emerge as we go along. Now, how do I, there we go. Spaff went through introduction, so I'm just going to skip through some of this. Oh, by the way, there are 84 slides here. Don't worry. We're not going to go nearly through all of them. I'm going to skip through a lot of stuff. I'd be happy to email the full presentation to anybody who's interested in it and go into depth in different aspects of different things if you want. So you'll see some things that'll fly by. We can follow up on them later. But I'm going to hit some highlight salient points and go through rather fast a lot of material. So just quickly as an agenda, we're going to talk about something I call the dissonant convergence as opposed to the harmonic convergence. And then we're going to do a kind of a timeline, a very subjective timeline, my point of view from 96 to 2001 and from 2001 to 2006, and then tackle 3 big questions. So I always start off here now, which is talking about what I call the dissonant convergence, the 21st century security crisis. And talking about risk and talking about security, especially now after the last few years, credibility to me seems to be almost the biggest issue. Credibility and authenticity, and making things relevant to people's personal lives in real ways. And so I talk about the fact that, well, let's just go down the list. Global warming, nuclear weapons proliferation, pandemics, failed states, natural disasters, terrorism, sustainability issues like overpopulation, organized crime, trafficking, and right down at the bottom, this is, again, my subjective risk matrix, cybercrime. Now, one of the interesting things, just to go back a minute, is I say these things are in large part interdependent and amplifying each other in many different ways. But it's important, especially when we're talking about cybercrime, and I mentioned NATO. You know, I was at this conference, a NATO advanced workshop on cyber terrorism. When they asked me to come, I said, well, you know, quite frankly, I don't know if I'm comfortable going to a conference about cyber terrorism since, basically we're still debating whether or not this is something that even exists. But I certainly am interested in infrastructure attacks. But the point is that just to really have credibility and authenticity talking about the very serious problems in cyberspace with cybercrime and cybersecurity, cyber risk issues in general, important to keep it in perspective. So this timeline begins in 1996 with the Nun Hearings, and I want to take you back to the Nun Hearings just as a demarcation point, because Senator Nunn, the senior senator from Georgia, was very powerful. I think at that time the Senate was actually in Republican hands. But he was so influential that he could actually have meetings, and Republican senators would actually show up. And in those days, the national security policy was bipartisan, truly bipartisan. And there was a realization on Capitol Hill that cybersecurity was going to be one of the major national security issues of the 21st century in many different ways, and they acknowledged in ways that we didn't even really fully understand yet. And so there was this impetus, there were these hearings, some wonderful people talked at them, some of them are listed there. Somehow I sneaked into the mix, and a lot of very important testimony. It's all still out there. There was this impetus that something was going to get done and something needed to get done, and some very smart people and very dedicated people were working on it. And during the hearing, this is part of my text, I said, it's human beings that are building systems, deploying systems, breaking into them, so it is human beings that we have to reach in terms of training, awareness, understanding their responsibility, not only to their corporations and to their own job security, but to their country and the world. And so I just want to underline this at the beginning, that this talk is more about the human factor.
And it didn't take long at all.
Than it is about the technical factor. It's about the, what was that? It's about the human factor as more than the technical factor. It's more of an existential talk than an academic talk. It's more of a psychological talk than a technical talk. And it's more journalistic than it is historical or scientific. So the reason I was at the Nun Hearings was to talk about the CSI FBI Computer Crime and Security Survey. And this is something we started with the FBI in 1995. They came to me and they asked a series of questions, and I said, well, these are wonderful.